Hello and welcome to Future Procurement. My name is Robert Freeman, and now we continue our series of interviews talking to the great procurement leaders from all over the world. And today actually we are having the Skype call to Mohammed Faridy from Canada, from Toronto. Hello, Mohammed.
Hello, Robert.
Mohammed is the CEO of OneView company, and he's helping procurement leaders to reduce technology spend. Did I say it right, Mohammed?
That's correct. That is what we do.
Can you elaborate a little bit? What is your background? We have a little bit pre-talk, and it was a really fun story. And then, how did you come until today in being a CEO of your own company?
Yes, of course. I know we're limited on time, so I'll keep my long sordid tale to very brief notes. But my background, by way of trade, I went to school to be an airplane mechanic. In fact, I'm a registered FAA airframe and power plant mechanic. That's what I studied because when I was very young, I thought that's what I wanted to do for a living. And what I learned very quickly is something that you like as a hobby, like working on airplanes or cars, sometimes that isn't always what you want to do for a living. So you keep your hobbies separate from your trade. So after a series of decisions and I worked in retail for quite some time. I actually worked in sales for quite some time. I moved into procurement. I started in a procurement help desk in the U.S. It was a purchasing help desk, just getting POs, getting quotes, helping clients figure out where their deliveries were. And as I started moving from different company to company as a contractor, I was very lucky. I met a lady. She was an attorney at Citibank in New York, and she saw something in me that I hadn't seen before. And she took me under her wing. She mentored me. She thought I had a capacity for negotiations. So she trained me to be a contracts negotiator for software in New York City. And from there, I kind of grew my career, and I moved back to Canada, where I'm originally from, in 2004. And I worked for a series of different companies, and I was moving up the corporate ladder. My last corporate role, I was a director of software category for a large insurance company here in Canada. And in 2010, I was sitting in my office, and I was talking to some consultants who we'd brought in to help us with some negotiations and to help us find cost savings in our technology spend. And I had an epiphany. I realized that the people who were sitting in my office, the only reason they were there was because I was too busy being a manager to do the work myself. But I could do the work much better than they could. So I made a decision after discussing with my family. I said, I really enjoy doing what I do. I'm a good negotiator. I like to negotiate. I understand contract management and IT procurement. Perhaps I can do this as an individual. So I started my own consulting company in 2010. And we got some clients. We were doing some work. I had a team. And what we realized was almost every client we worked with had a problem with contract management. They either didn't have a place to store their contracts, or if they did, they couldn't find them when they needed them. Contracts were constantly expiring. They were late on renewals. They were getting audited for compliance. So we built a tool to help my team while we were doing the consulting work. And when the clients started to see what we were using, they said, hey, can we use it as well? So about 4 or 5 years ago, we decided to commercialize that tool. So today we have a tool. It's a SaaS tool called OneView, which is a contracts repository. Our clients drag and drop their contracts in. It extracts key data, creates a dashboard, and allows them to get alerts when their contracts are expiring. And we have the consulting side of the business where we go in and we help organizations understand what they're using in terms of technology and how to be more efficient in terms of cost.
That's really, really inspiring story, honestly, and not only by the fact that you were brave enough to step out of the comfortable corporate life, having the more calm life, if you say in terms of being dependent not only on yourself but also on the company you're working for. But what I really was impressed with your story was turning your passion, as you described it, into your like full-time own business. And also what was really fascinating, that you could see the business opportunities where others didn't see them, or you were trying to solve the issues that you had by your own, and then providing this as a service to other companies. This is really, really valuable, that you had this view of being inside these problems, or facing these problems, and then proposing the solutions and turn it into your own business. This is really, really inspiring and interesting.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, one of the most important lessons I've learned in the last, almost 25 years that I've been in procurement, and the last almost 8 years now running my own company, is that what I've learned is that you always have to keep your eyes open for opportunities, and you have to be willing to change course, not completely, but make slight course adjustments as you go through life, because that's the only way you're going to get to where you need to end up. And here we call it pivoting in business. Exactly. You're doing something and then you pivot. And I think I've pivoted so much, sometimes I feel like a ballerina. I'm just spinning around. And that's okay, because if you're going to be an entrepreneur, and if you're going to have your own business, you have to have the stomach for those ups and downs. The highs are excellent, and the lows are temporary, and they're all learning experiences, and that's what gets you through them, I think.
I like it. I heard yesterday, actually, I was attending the trainings also on business, and it was said by the mentor that business is coming from failure to failure and enjoying the way to come to another failure, because of course failures happen, and when it's success you just leave it through and it goes fast, but it's the failures which you remember, and that makes you a good businessman. I mean, to stand up after this failure and to wait until another failure will happen, because it for sure will happen.
Yeah, that's so true. That's very true.
And that's a big difference between corporate world, and I mean, if you have failures there, then it's bad, but life goes on and the company will hopefully survive and everything. But so exactly. Truly adore your story and your viewpoint on these things. Great. Still, the coming back to procurement and to your core expertise. I said to you that the way I have spotted you on LinkedIn, actually it was your series of videos about the savings connected to software, right? And software negotiations. It was the 5 essential rules, if I'm not mistaken. It was of software negotiations. Can you elaborate on that, and what are your key advice for our listeners around this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the reason we started doing the LinkedIn posts, we started doing them about, I want to say 2-3 years ago. First, it was written articles, and then we found that people like to see videos. They're more engaging. But the idea with the videos is we want to be able to give people useful, bite-sized information that they can take and apply right away. Sometimes what happens is we get overwhelmed with information and instruction, and it's hard to really sort out what we can apply right away and what's long-term. And with regards to software contract negotiations and software spend, technology spend, this is a very niche area within the procurement industry. There's not that many people out there, procurement professionals, who are really good at IT procurement, particularly software negotiations. And the reason for that is because software contracts, unlike hardware contracts or contracts for office supplies or contracts for real estate, which have their own set of complexities, software contracts have a very unique set of complexities, and whoever is negotiating with for software contracts, they have to have some level of knowledge of the product. And software products are very complex. So I found that, there's very few people that are doing it. There's more people wanting to do this, to do software contract negotiations and software procurement. I encourage it. I think it's a fantastic field. And I wanted to provide some small, again, bite-sized pieces of information that could help people in this area. Because, and as I'm sure you know, procurement, and we were talking about this offline, it's a brotherhood, sisterhood. It's a community that is not well represented within the corporate space. That's just a fact of the matter. In North America, I would say in the government space, perhaps procurement is a little better represented. It's more respected because it's very structured and formalized. Anybody in North America who wants to do business with the government, I suspect it's the same in Europe, they have to go through a certain procurement process. But in the private sector, in the corporate space, unfortunately, there is a stigma that procurement are the folks that are roadblocks, or they don't know what they're doing, or they're just going to hold things up, or they're going to create meaningless processes. So, and nowhere is that more true than with technology. I mean, oftentimes early on in my career, I would run across executives, IT executives, who would kind of look at me and say, well, what do you know about technology? You're just a procurement guy. Leave the technology to us. When we're ready, we'll do the negotiations and we'll tell you when to cut a PO, basically. And that's a very tough hill to climb in an organization. So in my career, when I was in organizations, I fought those battles, and I won quite a few of them. I lost a few as well, but I learned quite a bit. And now my goal is to help other individuals who are fighting that battle with my experience in doing the same thing. So these videos that we do on LinkedIn, the 5 keys or 5 steps to negotiating with software vendors. We have another series called, the 7 skills of an elite negotiator. These are all meant to help people in our industry, in the procurement industry, tackle some of the issues that I know they're going to have because I've had them and my colleagues have had them. And that's the purpose. So that's why we created the videos. And the second part of it, from the cost reduction perspective, technology cost reduction is a very interesting topic for most organizations. You have some competing interests. You'll have the finance department, usually led by a CFO. They want to see a reduction in operating cost. They're interested in the bottom line. So they say, well, we want to reduce cost. And we know probably most of our spend is in technology for most organizations. So then they go to the technology executive, a CTO or CIO, and say, hey, we're spending all this money on technology. Help us reduce the cost. And the CIO and CTO says, well, everything we're using, we absolutely need to use. And, we're not the negotiators, so go talk to procurement. And then they go to procurement, and procurement says, well, we'd love to do it, but the technology group doesn't really bring us into the tent when they're negotiating with their suppliers. And quite honestly, we're not even really sure what technology we're using. We're brought in at the last minute. We're told, here's a supplier. This is a contract we've negotiated. Get it signed and get a PO out the door. So it's technology spend reduction is one of those things that every organization wants to do, but very few can actually figure out how to do it. And that's where we help.
And that's where you appear. And I like very much the way you, it's a little bit of a side note, how you make the personal brand, so to say. When you write your, or how do you say, when you are signing, you are saying, helping procurement leaders to reduce technology spend. very, very clear and very, very to the point. So I like this is, if you have this problem, talk to Mohammed. So a little bit promoted your brand. I like it.
Yeah,
and I encourage all of our listeners, if you are there with this kind of dilemma, please talk to Mohammed. And I will
absolutely
feel great if you will get some messages after this talk.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Yeah.
Good. So please help us to navigate ourselves through some maybe obvious example of unnecessary spends that we have, and maybe one or two examples of some non-obvious savings that we can make right away, or try to maybe tease our listeners now. What is there that they can do right away after they listen to this podcast? Give us a few examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually we've just published a webinar that we've been releasing to some executives who are requesting it. And if any of your listeners want this webinar, it's a 15-minute webinar. I'm happy to send it. They can reach out to us at oneviewnow.com and request it, and we'll send it to them. But basically, what we do in the webinar is we created a 3-step process for identifying areas of opportunity for technology spend reduction. Because one of the other things, I suspect most of your listeners are procurement folks, and they know, as I know, and you know, that when we work for a company, we get savings targets. Yeah. We are told that the company has an overall target for savings, and then that gets whittled down, and procurement gets a piece of it. Yeah. Technology procurement is usually the largest piece of it. We're given a number and said, over the next 12 months, you need to save this amount of money. And the challenge becomes, well, how do I even find the opportunities to save this much money? It's a very stressful process that a lot of procurement people go through. So we created a 3-step process because it's something that we've actually implemented with clients in North America, and we've helped a client in Europe as well with this. And at a very high level, without going into the details, what you need to do is you need to understand first, what is the technology that's running in your environment? And you have to work with your IT department. They can provide you with this data. You ask them to provide you with the data. Say, tell me what's in our environment, whether that's hardware or software. Software is usually the best opportunity. Yeah. So tell us what software is running in the environment. And then what you do is you create a functional map. So all of the software running in your organization is there to do something.
Okay.
What does it do? Is it database? Is it antivirus? Is it asset management? There are multiple categories. So you create a map. And what will happen inevitably when you create that map is you start to see overlaps. We're using 5 different databases, 2 different antivirus, 3 different asset management tools, right? And then you ask your IT department to provide you with a technology roadmap for your organization. Most organizations have this. And you start to overlay the functional map with the roadmap to say, okay, we have 4 different databases, and where is our technology going on the roadmap? Do we need 4 databases a year, 2 years, 3 years from now? Are we going to need more antivirus or less antivirus? And you start to see a picture emerge. You see overlaps. We don't need 4 databases. Maybe this one particular product we're going to need for years and years. Here's an opportunity where we can go back to the supplier and say, instead of me paying you every year an amount of X, I want to negotiate a 5-year deal with you, because I know based on my assessment that I'm going to have this for 5 years. You'd be surprised how significantly you can reduce the cost of a product if you go to a supplier and say, I will do a contract for 5 years versus year over year.
Great.
Right? That's just a real easy way to do it. The other thing to do, and unfortunately, a lot of procurement people know that they can do this, but they just don't have the time because they're so busy. You need to review your contracts. There are things in a contract that bleed money for an organization. One of the biggest ones that I've seen is annual increases on software. now.
What do you mean? What can I mean?
So
can you elaborate on that? What does it mean?
sure. So if you buy a piece of software for $100,000,
okay.
Most software you have to pay maintenance, and maintenance is calculated. The industry standard is at 18 to 20% of the purchase price. So if you spend $100,000 on software, you'll pay about $20,000 in maintenance. And that's annual maintenance to run the software. And for that fee, the software supplier provides patches and fixes and new updates and upgrades to the software. If something happens, you can call them. That's all covered in that maintenance. But what happens is most software suppliers every year will increase the fee by 2%, 3%. I've seen it as high as 7% a year. One thing you can do is you can actually put a cap on that increase. In fact, I've negotiated successfully with most suppliers to have zero increase on the annual fees, because I have it on good authority that increase year over year, which amounts to tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's just gravy that software suppliers get. And I say that because I'm also now a software supplier. I have a software product. So I'm blowing the industry wide open here. Okay. I have a software product, and I can tell you that if I were to increase my cost year over year, it would be for no other reason than to get a little bit more money in my pocket. That increase
over the years you are becoming more efficient. You are shaving off some of your costs naturally just by developing, by becoming more. Okay.
Absolutely. So we've actually gone in and did this analysis for customers. We did it for one customer, and we saw a contract, and for the last 5 years they were paying 7% increases year over year, and they would just pay the invoice. So we looked at the contract, and interestingly, the contract had language in it that capped their annual increases at the lesser of a market index here in North America called CPI. Yeah. The Consumer Price Index. It was the lesser of CPI or 3%. So their increase should have only been 3% a year, and they'd been paying 7% a year. We went back in, we brought the supplier in, and we said we want a refund for the last 5 years of unnecessary increases.
Wow.
And then we're going to amend the agreement and have no increases going forward.
Nice.
So whatever you made, keep it and be thankful we're still doing business with you. And there are so many opportunities like that out there. So if any of your listeners have software suppliers that are charging you for annual increases, tell them to stop. There's really no reason why they should be increasing your fees. And if there's any software vendors listening, I'm sure I'll be getting a call from them later.
I like it. But for me, wearing my procurement hat and not working with this category at all before, my natural reaction when you said about the increases annually, I thought, why it should increase? It should decrease every year.
You would think. Yeah.
Yeah. I would think that it decreases every year without, knowing, coming from completely outside. I never worked with this category. So to me, it sounds like not naturally, opposite to what it should be. Okay. But so you confirm my words that over the years you should become more efficient and decrease in actually this maintenance cost. But it's not what happens in reality, or?
Yeah. So and to be fair to the software vendors, they will come back and say, we're improving the product. It can do more for less, and that's what we use the money for to do product development and enhancement. And when they say that, and they will say that, for the folks listening, you can always go back to them and say, I pay you 18 to 20% a year in maintenance. That's what that's for. You shouldn't be calling your software vendor for support very frequently. If you are, then it's a bad product anyways, right? And if you're not, then you can ask your supplier, like, where is that money going then? Yeah. If not for product development and enhancement. The other line that I hear from suppliers is, and it's not just the software suppliers. They say, well, we have to do an increase because the cost of living has gone up. in North America. And there's inflation, and because of inflation, it's an inflationary index, so we have to increase our cost. Well, my question back to them when they say that is your industry the only industry affected by inflation?
Nice.
As a customer, I'm also, impacted by inflation.
Yeah.
So why should I pay you just so you can pay your employees a little bit more to get in their car and drive to the office? That doesn't seem fair. So when you attack these problems with logic, you'll find most suppliers will relent and decrease your cost. That's one of the most effective ways that I've found of immediately reducing technology spend in an organization.
Nice. And as you said, I fully agree here with you that just by applying common sense and some basic logic, you understand that these increases, for example, don't really make sense. But and then of course you can set up the meeting and negotiate that, etc. But I now remember in the beginning of our discussion, you said being in corporate, you don't really have time, or you don't really prioritize these topics to go deeper and to really reflect yourself and then talk with the service providers about this and really to boil it down to some logical facts or to fact-based discussion, let's say. So I mean, this is of course the power of consultants like you. When you come, you see the picture from a little bit another perspective, first of all from your experience, but also, I mean, you have the time to reflect, to understand the things deeper, and to say your viewpoint, and to sit and negotiate that contract. Very interesting. One more thing I thought could be interesting to share, or one more of, should I call it low-hanging fruit or advice that I have taken also from you, was around the software suppliers' deadlines.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that and also share this example with our listeners?
Yes, absolutely. So in our organization, my executive, my sales executive, he came from another software organization, and we were having a discussion the other day, and because I recently did a video about supplier deadlines. So oftentimes, and I find it more with software negotiations than other categories. The suppliers will come to the customer and say, okay, we've got this great deal on the table for you, but the deal is only good until the end of the month or the end of the quarter or the end of the year, whatever milestone date is coming up next. And so you need to sign it now to get the deal. Because after that date passes, or we can't hold the price for you. So I was talking to my sales executive, and I asked him frankly, I said, hey, you worked in another large software organization. How real is that date? And he smiled, and he said, it's not, for our organization, it wasn't real at all. I mean, that deadline was tied to our commissions. We have, quarterly targets and yearly targets for sales. Yeah. And so we're trying to make the sale, but it's not like after that date passes, they don't have to do any more sales. They still need to sell their product.
Like Cinderella story, yeah, after 12 o'clock.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything disappears.
It doesn't turn into a pumpkin, right? It's still there. So I always like to ask the question to suppliers when they say, hey, you need to purchase it by this date. I asked them, I said, well, what happens after the date? And if they say, well, your price is going to change, then I'll ask them, say, well, give me 2 quotes. Give me the quote for the price now, and give me the quote for the price the day after the deadline passes. And I've been in this industry for almost 25 years. I've yet to receive 2 quotes like that. Never will a supplier say, yeah, here's your quote before the deadline, and here's a quote for after the deadline. They will always come back and say, well, let's try to get it done by the deadline, and we'll see what happens. And for those folks listening, I know sometimes it's a bit scary, but trust me, your price will not go up after that date. It just won't, because they're suppliers. They're in the business to sell their product. They're not going to increase their price. You're not purchasing fine wine where, it gets more expensive as it ages. This is software. Now, I will caveat that by saying internally, you will also have your internal clients imposing dates. And here you really have to ask the question, what happens if we don't get it by that date? And look for an honest answer.
Yeah.
Sometimes it could be that, well, we need to get these goods or services in by a certain date because our project plan requires us to have some time to do implementation development, and we have to go live by a certain date. Otherwise, our clients are impacted. That's a real date, and that's the date you should be working towards. But if your internal client comes to you and says, and this happens a lot, well, we need it by this date because the supplier said the price is going to change. That's not a real date. Then you need to just focus on getting the best deal for your organization and negotiate. I actually had a supplier. This is a very large software company that everybody knows, and so I won't mention their name. And we were a few years ago. It was November. Their year end was December 31st, and they were pushing very hard for us to sign a contract for a large purchase. But my client didn't actually need the product until the middle of the following year. So the supplier became very aggressive. And at one point, we were in a meeting, and their sales executive said to me, well, listen, if you're not going to be serious about getting a deal done by the end of December, then we're just going to walk away and we won't bother having any more conversations, and we'll see what happens next year. So I looked at him and I said, you know what? That's a terrific idea. Let's end the conversation right now, and it will give us some time. I'm going to advise my clients to maybe look at other options because I feel like we're rushing it. So good idea. Have a great holiday. Merry Christmas. And we'll talk to you in January. And he panicked. I remember my client and I laughed about it afterwards. He panicked. He said, wait a second. Let's not be hasty now. So sometimes you have to call their bluff, but do listen to your internal clients is what I have to say about that. Their dates are important. You just need to vet them a little to make sure that their dates are based on their project and not what their suppliers are telling them.
I like it. So let's be fact-based. Let's use logic and common sense, and let's take a proper time to make the negotiations, to make the good and calm decisions, right? Not following the pressure from salespeople. Yeah. But rather following the pressure from our internal clients, as you described it.
Exactly.
It's a completely different thing. I like it. Yeah. Good, Mohammed. Coming closer to the end of this interview, can you give some big ideas, especially from your horizon of, as you say, 25 years of procurement experience? Can you share some of the big ideas that you have to our listeners from all over the world? What are your takeaways from all these years, and what is your one-two advice to our listeners?
Sure. One of the most important lessons I've learned in all of my years of working, not just in procurement but in other industries as well, is whatever you're doing, whatever roadblocks you have or things that you stumble upon, those are not hindrances, but rather tools that you need to put into your tool belt. Because whatever seems like an obstacle at the time, you will be able to use to your advantage going forward. And an example of that, I was working for a company as a salesperson before I got into procurement, and I was having trouble selling our products. It was very high-end electronic equipment. And my manager took me into the back and he said, how can you expect to sell something if you don't know what it is you're selling? You need to understand what it is you're selling. So I took that to heart. And in the retail industry, I decided to learn everything there was about the products we were selling. I've now applied that in procurement. So when I negotiate software deals, I make it a point to learn as much as I can about the software. I want to understand how the technology works. It makes me sound more intelligent when I'm talking to my internal clients, and it makes me sound very competent when I'm talking to my suppliers. So if there was one thing that I would advise your listeners is whatever you're procuring, whatever your category is, know your category intimately, not just at the surface. Know it better than even your internal clients know it. That will make you invaluable to your organization and well respected in front of your suppliers.
Nice. I like it so much. And on this really high note and on this inspiring message from you, Mohammed, I thank you so much for being with us for this time, and I really hope that we can talk more.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, and it was a pleasure doing this.
That was a super nice interview with Mohammed Faridy from Toronto, Canada. I remind that his company name is OneView, and you should definitely contact them if you are struggling with software and technology spend. And also I have attached the link to Mohammed's articles and posts in LinkedIn to show notes, so please check them out and read them through and start using those advice in those articles already now. Very, very good information. So I definitely will leave the link in the description. And one last thing. There is a special 15 minutes video by Mohammed and his team in OneView which describes 3 steps to reduce software spend by up to 20%. If the topic is interesting for you, make sure you get the video using the link I have given in the podcast description. This was Robert Freeman and Future Procurement. Talk to you soon.